So I'm Joan Moore. I'm the Director of Advancement here at Wichita Collegiate, and I am honored to introduce our speaker this morning because I have known her most of my life, and my kids and I have benefited from her wisdom, her expertise, and her love for children. So for those of you that don't know, I am a collegiate lifer, starting in kindergarten in 1971, and I graduated in 1984. And Bunny Hill started teaching me in the 6th grade. In 1977, our middle school was not structured like it is today with teaching teams for each grade. So there was one homeroom teacher for 5th grade and one for 6th grade. So Bunny loved the class of 1984 so much that she actually moved up with my class and taught us English 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th grades. And when we were in upper school, she was also our dean of students. So I knew her very well. She went on to be the head of upper school, then the head of middle school, and finally the assistant headmaster. I have been truly blessed to be one of Bunny's students, one of her mentees, one of her colleagues when I started working here 7 years ago, and always my friend and guiding light. Bunny's first name is actually Harriet, but she was born on an Easter morning, and she's been Bunny ever since. Our Bunny Hill Quad is named after her, because just like that beautiful space on our campus, Bunny is the heart and soul of Wichita Collegiate. Her 42 years of teaching and administrating at Collegiate are an invaluable resource to our families and our faculty, and I can't tell you how pleased we are that she has agreed to give this series of talks about students in middle school, arguably the most challenging time of our lives as parents. There are so many things to navigate and so many mistakes that can be made, but lots of challenges also lead to lots of opportunities. And that's what Bunny is here to discuss this morning. So with no further ado, I am thrilled to introduce to you my teacher, my mentor, my colleague and lifelong friend, and new collegiate grandparent to Lincoln Lighting, Mrs. Bunny Hill. You're welcome.
Should I wear this? It matches today. So thank you, Joan, so much. You touched my heart. And thank you to Anne for inviting me to do this series. And it's so much fun to be able to work with Anne again and to be here, where I feel like I should be every day anyway. When I was working at Collegiate, it didn't matter where I was headed, I would end up here. So if I was going to go to Dillon's to get a gallon of milk, I would realize I wasn't at Dillon's when I got to Collegiate. It was, just an automatic kind of thing. It's very hard after all those years to break that habit, so it's kind of fun to be back. We have a very ambitious schedule today, and the difference between what we sometimes do in these sessions and today is this really is a workshop. The idea is that you will be able to think about some things for yourself and your family and write some things down and begin to plan a little bit what you're doing and why you're doing it and all of those kinds of things. I like having the names here, and at some point today when we do some more discussing, we'll probably move around a little bit so then you can see each other's names too, but I like being able to see them as well. I think the stories that I want to tell, I need to tell you this about stories. When I do this workshop, I tell lots of stories about kids and their families and things that happen. And a lot of times I use my own children because then I don't feel like I'm sharing somebody else's confidences. My children don't always know this, and when they start coming to these sessions, I don't know what I'm going to do, but you don't need to leave here and go say to one of my kids, oh, well, I heard when you, this can just be between us. Sometimes I tell stories that involve me and a student or me and a family, and because they're such great examples. And I always try to do those in a way that respect people's privacy, but that still share the lesson or the wisdom that might come from those things. So that's just sort of a in full disclosure kind of thing. The whole idea for the expanding Playpen came to me in probably the late 1990s, early 2000s. At the kind of the end of a very intense period of study and work with upper school and middle school students. Although from the time I was in 7th grade, I feel like I've been living in that world. One thing about the way that I learn, and we all have our own way, but I have always learned just by watching and by wondering. And I mean, if there's a crime here today and the police come and interview all of us, I will be able to give them very good information because I just notice things. Now, I don't know what I don't notice, but I do know what I do notice. And I can remember very well sitting in 7th and 8th grade watching what the boys were doing and thinking, why are they doing? Just being so fascinated about the things they said and did and the way they would shuffle around and hit each other and bump into each other and knock each other's books off the desk. And, I mean, I just thought it was fascinating. And it probably more fascinating than my English or math was, but those middle school boys really fascinated me a lot in those days. So I was, on the day the importance of this topic came to me, wasn't just because of one incident, but this incident kind of pulled everything together for me. And I was sitting in the middle school head's office, and my desk was situated so that I could see, now I need to see everybody here, so that I could see in the outer office where the assistant was, there was a phone that the kids could use to call home. They didn't actually need their own personal phones. They could come in and ask permission, and we could decide if it was important enough for them to call home. But anyway, this was after school, and I thought at the time, I'm going to write a book about phone conversations between middle school kids and their parents from just the middle school end, because I couldn't hear the other end. But no matter what hysteria there was, hysteria as in, where are you? You were supposed to be here 2 minutes ago. Or you just drove off with my lunch in your car. Or you've got to come. They were so mean to me. I just don't know what I'm going to do. No matter what it was, there would be a conversation. And they always ended with, I love you too. So that was going to be the title of the book, I Love You Too. But on this day, school was over. And as now, we had tutorials after school. So there were places where kids could go. And we had kids club. So that if their parents were working and couldn't pick them up, there was a place to go if they weren't doing something else. There was a plan. There was an established plan where what everybody would do under any circumstance from 3 to 6 if you were still on campus. Well, one of my friend's sons went to the phone. He was an 8th grader. So he was 14 years old maybe. And he lived across the street in Country Place. And his mother worked on campus. So he goes to the phone, he gets permission, and that's who he calls his mother. And clearly he's saying, come take me home. And she's saying, I can't. And the conversation goes on for quite a while. And when he hangs the phone up, he just sits there for the longest time in the chair with this puzzled look on his face like, now what am I going to do? And she won't come take me home. But he was taking it in. So I was really interested in this. I think he's an 8th grade boy, right? He has a key, I'm pretty sure. He can go home, he can eat. That's one of the things my kids would have been frantic about at 3 o'clock. He could go ride his bike, ride his skateboard, see his friends, play video games, study, take a nap, watch TV. He could do all kinds of things if he would just get up and go home. So I thought, well, when he finally left the office, I thought, well, okay, he's decided what he will do now for the next 3 hours. Well, I left at 5:45. And I go to the parking lot, and here he is sitting on the steps, still waiting for his mother. And when I got in the car, I thought, how could someone let themselves be this bored? Why isn't he going home? What's he doing here? There is nothing happening on this step. And he didn't have a book in his hand or anything. So I began to think, but why? Why wouldn't the automatic thing be get yourself home? In fact, along the way, all kinds of fun things could happen. you never knew what you might run into when you're out in the world. And so I began to put together all these different things I'd read and seen with kids, and I thought, we've lost something. We've lost a period of time. We've lost something where childhood is coming to an end, and before we hand them the keys to the car to drive around and do all kinds of things we've lost this whole 6 or 7 or 8 year period of time when kids are gaining that kind of independence, and when they're moving around the world on their own, and when they're out there in the world, things happen, and that's the good thing. We want them to be out in the world and have things happen, because until they meet those things head on and know that they can deal with them, then they don't go the next step in their growing up. Well, at the time, the metaphor, the expanding playpen, made a lot of sense to me. When the baby starts to crawl around and you're going to leave the room, you got to put them somewhere so they don't fall down the stairs. And so you put them in the playpen, but the day comes when they can climb out. And then that's not of any use anymore. And so then if your backyard is fenced, you put them outside and you're looking at them out the kitchen window and you're making sure they're okay, and they're there. They're okay. And then the day comes when they can open the gate. Right? And so then, hopefully they're old enough to understand, okay, you can go to the front yard, but you can't go across the street, or you can't go more than 3 houses down, or you can't cross driveways, or whatever it is that we say. But you're still out there where something more exciting is happening. A bus might go by, or the neighbors might come out and talk to you, or something else. The world is out there. And then the day would come when they were riding bikes, or and you just say, okay, you can go around the block. And then I want to see you when you come back, so you've made it back. Or you can go down this far, or you can go that far. Pretty soon, once that's done, then this playpen just got bigger and bigger. Then the day would come when they could take that bicycle and ride to the store for you and come home with a gallon of milk. Or when they could go to a friend's house. Or whatever they could do, they could go do it. Or they could get themselves to school. Or they could, as in this boy's case, certainly get themselves home from school when it was 3 blocks away. And I just was so curious about that. What happened? I know that we've seen about kidnappings. I know that we know there are pedophiles somewhere in the day. I know that we know things. But don't we know that kids have to grow up? And that it's not one day you open the door and you're grown. It's a long process of things that happen. So I thought, but what are those things? What are the things that need to happen for us to become adults? Well, if you were here last week, you know that when I began to talk about this idea, we were in a period of long adolescence. And that would have been all through the 80s and the early 2000s, that probably by 2000 it was beginning to change a little, but it was 2005 before that would really have ended. But what was happening in those years were that kids were becoming like teenagers earlier. We were starting to have to really watch carefully this because they wanted to get going. By the time they were 12, they were ready to do some things. But we also knew that it was taking them a long time to actually assume the skills that adults have. A long time, right? 25. Now, 25, in retrospect, makes sense. It made sense. We knew that was true then, but it also makes sense because that's when we know that the brain rewiring that begins at puberty has really kind of solidified, and this prefrontal cortex is functioning like an adult brain, meaning it's a reliable decision maker. It's a reliable problem solver. It's a reliable monitor on what our behavior is by then. Now, some of us are born with a brain that feels like that. It doesn't mean it is like that, but some of us have more sense younger than other people do. For instance, girls. And I don't mean to offend anybody, but they are carefuler for sure. I don't know if they think better, but they're definitely not as much risk takers as teenage boys are. they're the biggest group of risk takers in the world. But when I read iGen and began to think about this whole thing, this slow childhood thing, I realized, well, the same theories in the expanding Playpen apply with slow childhood. The piece for parents and teachers and others of us to figure out is, okay, if it takes them till 18 or 20 to become a true adolescent in terms of what they're doing, then how long will it actually take to get to adulthood? Adulthood isn't on here. This is from childhood to adolescence. But it's still, these tasks still have to be accomplished. So I think the expanding Playpen theory that we're going to talk about today and the plans that we think about that we need to know as parents, I think they still apply, maybe even more urgently, but certainly it's not going to end when we send them to college. At this rate, we're still going to be parenting or trying to figure out how to stop parenting at that point when they go to college. If you weren't here last week and slow childhood doesn't resonate, the book that we used was iGen, like iPhone, spelled, little I, big G. And what it suggests is today's 18-year-olds are more like 12 and 14-year-olds of just about 20 years ago. So that they are functioning in high school. The kids in many ways are functioning as children instead of teenagers, even though their chronological age is teenage. I want to also kind of lay out for us that parenting, once we're in it, once we have children, it's very easy for parenting to be an in-the-moment thing because the demands are in the moment. And at the end of the day, we're exhausted. We may not sleep. We may be worrying, but we're still exhausted. We're not really in high-functioning planning mode. So I want to lay out kind of a philosophy of parenting. We'll talk some today about parenting styles, and then we'll talk, too, about, okay, this is our chance to take a deep breath and think about what it is we do, why we do it, what we forgot to do, what we never even knew to do, and what might be helpful to do, or what might be harmful to do. So there's a lot in here that we will be covering. I know some of you need to come and go. A whole day is a long time, and feel free. I understand completely. We're just going to carry on. And at lunchtime, I will talk at lunchtime. It will be on a little different topic, but we'll take a break and get lunch and come back in. But I will be talking then. But if that's a time when you feel like you need to get out for a while, I understand. We will just carry on. My view of parents is that one other metaphor we could use is I like to think of a child as a plant or a flower, and the parents are the water and the food and the sun. And what we don't ever want to be as the parent is the lawnmower or the mistakiness for a weed kind of thing, even when it looks like a weed. That we still have to be the ones who are the water, the food, and the sun. The world will be the challenges. The world will provide the poison and the shears and all those things. But for parents, we have to always be thinking about that fact that we're the nurturers. I love this quote from the Talmud, and I don't have it in front of me, so I may not get it exactly right, but it's every blade of grass has an angel whose job is to lean down and whisper, grow, grow, grow. And that's my image of parent, the grow, grow, grow. There is a poem, and you don't have a copy of it, but I will read it before we launch in, On Children from the Prophet by Khalil Gibran. You know this poem, but as you listen to it, I will read it slowly, so you can think about it in terms of yourself as parent and your child or children. And a woman who held a babe against her bosom said, "Speak to us of children." And he said, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. and they are with you, yet they do not belong to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for the gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves the bow that is his stable. This is one of those poems, by the way, that you read it and think, oh no, my thoughts are very important to my kids and they're going to know what those things are. But when you grow older and your kids are grown more and you begin to think about what just happened in the last 25 years, this begins to feel very wise and very true. And so maybe some forward perspective for thinking about. So basically the theory of the expanding playpen is we keep our kids here beside us until the day when we send them away. Instead of that magical time when kids were really on their own lot, when they learned a lot, that was called yesterday. So let's talk about how we're going to expand this playpen. First of all, let's we'll move forward. You have in your packet a thing called A, which says the expanding playpen. We're going to do little bits of this and keep coming back to it all day, but we're going to start with this right now. So if we're thinking about, okay, we get them out of the playpen, we get them out of, for a lot of kids, they actually never leave the front yard now, but let's say we get them out of the front yard. And we begin to expand from the front yard forward, from the front yard till the day they drive off in a car by themselves. Okay, those years, whatever years those might be in your minds. We know from iGen that less kids are driving off in the car, so that doesn't work as well as it used to, but we're going to assume it does. So what is supposed to happen during those years? Well, those years are the adult task training ground years. So those are the years where kids are supposed to start assuming independence, responsibility, building kind of their own lives, their own networks of people they know. I remember my sister, who was 4 years younger, was all of us were always out of the house because we weren't allowed in the house in my neighborhood. But my sister was in other people's houses. She wasn't one to play with the kids as much as she wanted to go see what people were doing. And every person in town knew her. And I mean, all the old people knew her, and they all gave her cookies, and you know, they thought she was so funny, and they thought she was a lot nicer than we thought she was at home, by the way, which is one of the benefits of having your own network, because other people see you very differently than your role is at home. They might like you more, as a matter of fact, because they don't have to live with you. But anyway, and then when we grew up, and she would come to visit me, every time she got off an airplane, there were people carrying her bags and carrying her kids and talking to her. And I do everything in my power not to talk to somebody on an airplane. And it usually involves a book, you know. But, I mean, she just was one of those people. Well, talk about building networks. She was doing it when she was 6. And so in our town, somebody might say to me, oh, you're so-and-so's daughter. But somebody would say to my mother, oh, you're Patty's mother. You know, it was a whole shift around. Actually, that is one of those things that you want to happen for your children. You, in this time we're talking about, you want them to develop a network of human beings who have relationships with them that have nothing to do with you. So that could be teachers, coaches, scout leaders. I mean, that could be people like that, neighbors, extended family outside of kind of the close circle. It could be people they work for if they ever babysit or do yard work or get a job or anything. But it won't be those people if you're there too, right? Or if we're there too. So it's not going to be the coach if you're one of the coaches. It's not going to be the coach if you're one of the parents hanging over the fence helping the coach. Because that relationship isn't happening with us there. Building these networks is a thing that happens that kids are supposed to start doing without us. And the only way to do that is to not be with us. That's really where the challenge is for us as parents, because we're not really sure we want other people that close to our children. When we aren't with it, we have fears. But it's not just fears. That's definitely at the top of the list. The other thing we have is we want to be the ones to shape and to inform and to tell and to influence our children. That's harder for some people than others to let go of. But one of the things that you need to know is your child may not claim himself, herself, yet when they're teenagers. They may still be wondering, the who am I thing. You know who they are. You've known since they were born. You've certainly known since they were 2. You know who they are maybe even better than they know during those years. But that's not the point of those years. They're going to be, when they're 25, who you thought they were at 10. Just more confident and more of it. The point of those years is for them to know. And one of the ways that they learn and they know is they see how what we have taught, what we do, what we know is different than what everybody else does. And they might even try some of those ideas out, or they might even wonder about some of those ways of doing things. But all that really does is provide a way for them to see themselves more clearly. It's not a negative. Now, when it feels like a negative is when they have friends who are idiots, right? Or friends who are wild, or friends who get them in trouble, or kids who are mean to them. I mean, there are times when this feels very, very uncomfortable. We're going to be talking about those kinds of friends soon, later, eventually. The next thing that's supposed to happen during these years is they are supposed to assume for themselves some meaningful roles in the world. Okay? Not just my son, my daughter, or my daughter's older brother, or, that kind of role, but roles in the other places where they are. Who are they at school? Who are they in their activities? Who are they to these people that they're networking with? What roles have they assumed for themselves? What roles are they trying out? They're learning how to do this. If they go to
students that are in Mrs. Morales' class, that's going to the art battle. The old bus is up front.
The art battle? That sounds interesting. If they get out in the world without ever having done some of this, then how do they go into a new world like college, say, and think of a role a way they can fit in, something they have to add, something that they have to offer, something that makes them interesting, so that other people are really drawn to them. That's why this is happening. That's why this should be happening during these years. They definitely need on-the-job training for how to be an adult. And that looks different in every family. That probably looks a little bit different with every child, but it doesn't just happen. If they've never made a bed when they go to college, I'm going to tell you what, they're never making a bed. Unless they go to the Army. I mean, they'll teach you how to make a bed. Or into the service of somebody. Your roommate's they may not like your unmade bed, but your roommate's not going to teach you how to make a bed. There's this thing that was on the internet yesterday, and I responded to it, and I probably offended somebody. Oh, it was no one in this room. I'm thankful for that. It says there ought to be a class called Life Skills that teaches kids how to change the oil, change a tire, balance a checkbook, so 3 or 4 things. And I commented, well, there is. It's called home. Right? Isn't this what we're supposed to do? Is teach life skills to our kids? I mean, I don't know how to change a tire, so clearly I'm not going to teach I did do it in driver's ed, but if my life was in danger, I know the steps, but I have no interest in teaching my kids how to change a tire, but I sure don't expect somebody else to do it. I mean, that's not like I'd pay money for somebody else to do, to make a bed, to cook supper, to dust.
Kids, and Mrs. Rainflower's class, you guys need to head out to the bus.
When I first began thinking about this, we talked a lot then about sort of the self-indulged child, or the child that felt kind of entitled because everything was being done for him. And this was not just a matter of income. This was a matter of the way we were parenting. You know, when the mother does everything, then why would the child think that she had to do something? But there's a price to pay for that. And what I've got jotted down here to share about that, the price is that when we give our kids too much, and this could be in all kinds of ways, and we demand too little of them, there's a huge price to pay, and they're the ones who pay it. And it gets paid later. And that the solution to that is to not do that, and that's much of what we're going to talk about today. At the bottom of this page, there's this list of 7 capabilities. We're not going to go over the whole thing, but it's important that I at least say a little bit about it because it's going to come up over and over as we go through the day. When I was a child, one of the defining moments of my childhood was that I had polio in the last polio epidemic in America. Every summer, polio would sweep through this country, and its victims were mostly children. Children would die and become paralyzed, and anybody in my age group had kids that they went to school with who walked with leg braces, and we knew what polio was. So in this last epidemic, I got it. Well, the reason that ties in here, and I may mention it again later for other reasons, but it ties in here because there was a man named Stephen Glenn who wrote a book called Seven Capabilities, or Developing Young Capable Children. And he did some research, and the way that he did it was to mimic what Jonas Salk did when he finally came up with the vaccine that worked. Because I had been vaccinated with the original vaccine, but people were still getting polio. But Jonas Salk's vaccine, when he developed it, he studied the children who didn't get polio. He studied the groups in the community where there was the epidemic who weren't affected. So Stephen Glenn's thinking was, okay, I want to study kids who are growing up, stable, emotionally healthy, and with self-actualized, moving into successful adult life. So I want to study that group and figure out what is it that's different from that group for the ones who struggle so much, struggle to become adults. And he came up with these 7 things, and they were called capabilities. And in these families of these kids, he said, here's what happens. The first one is kids growing up in these families all felt very capable of whatever. Oh, I can make supper. I can mow the lawn. You know, I can take my sister to school. I can bring tea to my mother if she's in bed with a headache. You know, I can do this. And that feeling that they had, I can do it, started young because they did things. They were kind of expected to. In our family, we do these things for each other. We all do them. There's not one of us who does them. We all do them, right? So when you do it, then you feel this sense of confidence, which he would say, I feel capable. The second one is that there's a strong perception of significance in primary relationships. I contribute in meaningful ways, and I am genuinely needed. This one resonated when I started this with me so much. It still does, and here's how it plays out. If in the old days, and I mean older than me days, my job as a kid was to chop the wood and bring it in for the fire, and I didn't do it, then the family didn't eat, and the family got cold that night. That's what happened. So they need me to do this. And if I don't do it, they're going to wish I was there doing it, because they're all doing something else, right? When there isn't this sense of I'm part of the team and I'm needed here and I provide something important to the group, and I feel like if I don't come home, nobody will miss me, then this kind of sadness, depression, isolation, this kind of feeling of not really belonging in the way of we have to do this to be together isn't there. Now, we know from last week that the sadness and isolation of our children has grown exponentially in the last 10 years. But I would say that is probably especially true in families where the kids are taken care of, but they don't take care. They aren't part of that rhythm. And again, those things start early, they're taught young, and so we'll talk about that. So these are the kind of things that the experiences we're going to talk about today are intended to establish and help create for the family. Now, let me say, it's tough. It's really tough because it honestly doesn't take as much to run a house as it did in days gone by. When I was growing up, when you prepared dinner at night, there wasn't a microwave. I mean, we peeled the potatoes, right? We baked the food in the oven, and it took an hour at least. We had to think about, what's going to go on the table, and we all did it. And but our mother had been busy all day. She didn't work outside the home, but she'd been cleaning the house and buying the groceries, and she'd been busy. But it never occurred to her that she would be busy alone. I mean, that was it was not her goal that when we walked in the door, our clothes would be hung in our closet, the refrigerator would be stocked, dinner would be just about ready, the table would be set. I don't know any adult women who ever set a table. That's something somebody else can do, right? I mean, it never occurred to her, but she didn't have to think about it much because it took all of us. And in the generation before that, it took people way more than it took all of us. And then we work our way down the generations. It's not that hard to do everything without asking for help. Especially if we have a mindset that that's our job to do it. I mean, that our kids have homework and they're so busy and they have all these things to do. We don't want them to waste their time doing these other things, right? So anyway, we'll get to chores, but the point of this is you have to do things to become capable, and you have to be involved in the workings of a group and a family to feel like you're important. And it makes you feel much more included, much more loved, and much more protected to think, what would they do without me? What would they do without me? It's not just because they'd be sad because they love me, but what would they do without me? I'm important here. I'm as important as every other member of the group. All right? So that's where we're going. Make sure I didn't forget anything. Okay, let's see if you have some questions about any of that before we move forward, or comments. Yes?
What age do you think is appropriate to be watching in school by
Oh, that's such a good question. You know that if someone follows your child home with a camera and puts it on YouTube, you're going to be in big trouble. We have to band together on this one. So I think it really depends where you are. I live off of 13th and Armour. And when I come to school, on the days when I get to pick up my grandson at 3:15 here, and we drive back to my house, the sidewalk's full of kids walking home from Coleman. I mean, there are, 100 kids walking. And I've noticed when I go further down on 13th Street, all the way to Oliver at least, but maybe a little bit past that, there's still kids walking from Coleman. They might be coming now from Robinson, I don't know. But there are kids all over the place walking home. Interestingly, in neighborhoods closer to Collegiate, like Lake Point and Country Place, there aren't hundreds of kids walking home at night. So the age. I walked to school at Riverside over in the park area by the river. When I was in first grade, I walked from my home to Riverside School, which is through the park, over the river, and 6 blocks away. I was in first grade and I walked alone. I could do it. And then when I moved to Indiana not long after that, there wasn't a kid in town I ever saw transported anywhere. It was a small town. But in at least by 10. But, I'm saying 10-year-olds. I guess I would draw this line. I think 10-year-olds can do just about anything if we've taught them how and let them. But I would suspect even a first or second grader could walk home in a neighborhood where you knew they were coming and there were other kids. Well, the thing about schools is every major street has a light. So I would think a school crossing, and most of them right after school have a crossing guard. We just have the light out there, but there aren't a lot of kids crossing over there. But, I think with the right... One phrase I think that helps to think about, we do this for teachers, and I think it helps parents too, is when your child is about to go into a new situation. You prepare the situation for the child, and you prepare the child for the situation. So you wouldn't just say, get yourself home, right? You'd do it with them for a while, or you would at least have practice sessions, or you would have some kind of sense of, okay, what might be the problems along the way, or, what are you working on, and who's your buddy going to be? You may not want him to do it alone. If it's not going to be a brother or sister, then is there a neighbor who's doing it? But I think it takes a lot of thought. But I can tell you that even in Wichita, Kansas, in places that aren't as safe as ones that you might be, kids are doing this every single day. And they're getting something from it. This is the other thing. This is not a bad thing that's happening. I see these kids. I watch them carefully. I'm so fascinated. They are laughing. Yesterday, this kid who had to be an 8th grader was walking with his arm around this one who might have been a 6th grader. And so I'm thinking as I'm driving by, I'm wondering, is he picking on him? What's going on here? And they were just laughing. And I don't know if they were brothers or friends or what, but they weren't classmates. But there's things happening. You go in Walgreens at 13th and Woodlawn. I go in Walgreens at 13th. And if you go in after Coleman lets out, it's full of kids. And they're all buying a candy bar, or, this takes me back to my childhood. They're pulling the money out of their own pocket. I think 10, though. Let's call 10 a magic age. Because 10-year-olds could actually run the world if we would let them. 10-year-olds are kind of the peak of childhood. They are smart. They are capable, if we've taught them to be. They have brains that are functioning in lots of ways. They could run the world in many ways, especially the girls, because the girls are watching everything around them. And they're calculating what's happening with each of these groups, and what are they doing, and what did she say, and did you see how her face looked, and she was so sad. Once puberty hits, then you lose some of that confidence. But by 10, I would say we're in slow childhood. My hope about slow childhood is this, that at least they keep what they had at 10. That at least we got them that far intact with their ability to do things. Okay? Then each parent, of course, always has to be the one to decide. Any other questions or comments before we move on?
You know, I have a comment on that. I live across the parking lot from here.
Mm-hmm.
And my son, who's in 8th grade, walks to school.
8th grade.
Fall days when the weather is not freezing. And the anxiety that I have at home while, you know, let's say between 7:30 when he leaves, you know, the backyard, my backyard, and what I take, you know, I give him 15 minutes at the most to get to the middle school. The anxiety that I feel about all the security issues that are going on, you know, out in the world. And I've even contemplated, okay, I'm going to wake up, I'm just going to get dressed and walk with him. I see myself like maybe walking behind
the block back, yeah.
You know? And I say, okay, those days that I would do that, maybe he'd be safe, but there will be days that I can't do that. You know, and then what? You know, those scary things are still happening. How do you teach yourself to, because I think my take, I haven't gotten a chance to read the book yet, but my take on what's causing the long adolescence and all of that is we're projecting our fears into the process of raising our children. You know, they don't care. And if I want, in my mind, I want to sit him down because he doesn't have this prefrontal cortex yet. I'm going to imprint mine onto him, you know. And but he doesn't care. He's like, no, it's not. I'm 13 and a half, and it's not time for me to take on a prefrontal cortex yet. So how do you deal with that discrepancy?
So what you voice is what many of us as parents today feel. It's fearful parenting, right? That anxiety that you feel. And we've left this behind. Here's where we are here. They both have similar things. Well, first of all, he does feel what you feel. He may be saying to you, Mom, I'm 13 and a half, and he's right. My God, he should be able to go wherever he wants, truthfully. But he may be saying, Mom, I'm a big boy now, I can do it. But he knows that you're worried. They know that we are worried. All of us, as a culture, we are scared, right? And that anxiety that we feel is mirrored in them, and that's why they're more anxious, more depressed, more suicides. That's why that's happened. It's not because for most children, thank God, they haven't witnessed a traumatic event. It's because they're afraid of the possibility of the traumatic event. Actually, and I know this is hard. It's easy for me to say my kids grew up, right? But I do have grandkids now, so at least I'm thinking about, okay, what about these? So it's easy for me to say, but not just because my kids grew up. It's easy for me to say because I know this is true. A 13-and-a-half-year-old, in most times in the world, could have taken care of their family forever. Done every single thing that needed to be done, including go out and shoot the food and cut the wood and build the fire and, anything. A 13-and-a-half-year-old is really able if they've had the experiences. So that prefrontal cortex isn't there yet, but part of what grows it is the experiences that happen that are trouble. So you don't actually, I know you don't, you may think you do, but you really don't want him to always get to school without trouble. Because the real thing that would be great is if he got to school after facing down some trouble and walked in and he was just fine. And then all of a sudden there's some connections. Oh, I'll do that. And next time something happens, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to do this or this or this. We'll talk about what are some of those experiences where trouble could happen that wouldn't be death, that wouldn't be kidnapping, but would be trouble that had to be analyzed and dealt with. And how then that helps you grow up. But your story is perfect, Jackie, because I mean, some of us in the room live way too far for our kids to get to school in a reasonable amount of time. So I live 2 miles away from school. And when our boys were in started middle school and then were in middle school and high school, if they got a detention, the rule was you get yourself to school on days when you get a detention. And you may not accept a ride when someone stops and says, you need a ride. You just walk. And so they had to leave way earlier to get here in time for detention, which was before school. But, they could do it. It wasn't like they were, climbing a mountain or something. They were just walking. They were going to go out after school and practice and run and do wind sprints and, climb stairs and do all this other stuff. They could certainly take their feet and walk to school. We'll come back. But fearful parenting is the term. You think helicopter parenting, overprotecting, but I really think that fearful parenting more clearly describes, and not just for the fears we have for their safety because of the world we think is out there, but because of, there's another thing that it's because of that I just lost. It'll come back to me. It's fearful parenting because of real danger. Oh, because of the shame of what other people will say about you letting your kids be out there by themselves. There's a great book written by the woman who left her 5-year-old in the car while she ran in to pick something up at the store. And somebody videoed it, and then she got, what's the name of that book? Anyway, I'll let you know what the name of the book is. But, I mean, she went through 2 years in court of them wanting to take the child away and of all the shame of what she had done. And it's a fascinating book, and she, I think, is maybe the one who coined or made popular the fearful parenting thing. But it's being afraid that other people will judge you for doing what you really think makes sense to do with your kids and letting them get out there in the world.
I do let my kids walk home from school. We live 1.6 miles, and the number of text messages and phone calls I get just from them walking for 25 minutes is unbelievable. Are your kids okay? Do they need a ride? Are you stuck at work? Can I help you? You guys wouldn't believe it. And it's the shame. And I'm like, no.
What are you doing?
Everything's great. Thanks for checking in. I'm awesome. Have a good day. I'm like, it's crazy, though. It is. And
Yeah.
That's great. That's non-fearful.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, but it's like, I'm almost the opposite because
Yeah.
you hear from all these people and I'm like, don't make me feel bad.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. They need a little sunshine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That makes you feel better in that way. Yeah.
But,
You want to live in a community where you think, well, the parents are, if there are people watching out. There are people who would help if they knew. We'll get some examples of that in a little bit. Okay, so let's put this piece of paper aside for a little bit and move on to the one that is labeled B, begin with the end in mind. So, begin with the end in mind is one of Stephen Covey's habits of highly effective people. It might be number 3, but I can't remember for sure. And what he says is, if you take a minute, and he really means take a minute, not a month, a minute, to think about what it is you want to happen. What is the goal? What is it we're trying to accomplish? If you take a minute to think about the goal first, and you begin with that in mind, everything that happens in between will be different. That the dramaticness of how different it will be is shocking. So I did some Stephen Covey training back in the 90s, so this kind of all coalesced in my own mind. But as I watched the kid at the phone saying, come get me, come get me, I began to think about, well, if we as parents really thought about that, then what we said on the phone would be so much different. what we set up for our kids before they went to school or left the house, or what would be so different if we really thought about, but what is the end? Not what do I feel today, or what could happen today, or what am I nervous about, or just thinking nothing, but this is where we're going. So this is what we have to do. So, for instance, in school, and I would share this with middle school parents especially, but it applies across the board. So, kid forgets the lunch. It's actually her responsibility to take it out of the car. Probably it's already been made for her. But anyway, which, by the way, doesn't have to be, but it could be. But she could at least get it with her bag and take it out of the car. Or I left my backpack in the car. I left my tennis racket in the car. I left my whatever in the car. And I'm on the phone, and Mama's, come back, come back. Well, yeah, if you forget your lunch, and you call Mom or Dad and say, my lunch is in the backseat of the car, what am I going to do? And if what's going through the parent's head is, oh my gosh, you're the only kid in the lunchroom without the lunch, it'll look like I'm such a bad parent, he's got a test in history after lunch, he won't have had any food, I went to all this trouble to pack a healthy lunch, and now it's going to waste, and all these things, you just turn that car around and race back to school and give them the lunch. But if you've kind of thought about your children growing up, and one of the things you want them to be able to do is take their own lunch out of the car, or is be responsible, or be resilient, or be able to roll with the punches, or be able to say to the middle school secretary, I forgot my lunch, could I buy a lunch ticket for today? Or to say to my friend, I forgot my lunch, could I have half your sandwich? Or to not eat lunch. There's some possibilities, right? But if my end is, I want my child to be in charge of this. I didn't forget his lunch. I've got something to do. I shouldn't be driving back to school with the lunch. Then it changes our parenting behavior. If we've got the end in mind, it changes our parenting behavior. So I was very keenly aware of this when we took our oldest son to college. So I think I could say my husband and I were very engaged parents, meaning we were, not much happened by accident at our house. And nothing happened without notice. But we were driving to North Carolina, oldest child going to college. I was already traumatized. The idea of living without him was impossible to even fathom. And we had 2 days in the car to cry about it. I mean, it wasn't like it was KU and we had 2 hours. So all the way there, I am thinking, my mind was just racing with all the things I'd never told him. I'd never taught him how to sew on a button. I mean, there were so many things that hadn't come up. Which reminded me that when he was in kindergarten on his Otis Lennon or whatever it was, there was a vocab thing. The only vocab word he didn't know was mend. I got to mend something in front of this kid. But anyway, so we're driving, and then after I got past the how to sew on a button, I thought, I've never really talked to him about a relationship with a woman, not a girlfriend, but how do you develop a respectful, intimate, engaged relationship with someone that could go on for your whole life? And what does that look like from the woman's point of view? And I mean, my head was just reeling. And there were some others that were even bigger than that one. So when I got home, I thought, this is ridiculous. There's no question that we had already imparted lots of the most important values that we had. But clearly there were some that didn't fit into childhood that I still wanted to have imparted. Because he was going to be an adult out there without me, right? May not come up when they're 15, but when you're out there, it's going to come up. So I began this thing where we begin with the end in mind as parents. And I said, if you just sit down, just you as the parent, or you and the other parent of the child, sit down together, make a list of the most important things to you that they have when they walk out your door for good. All you have to do then is stick it in a drawer. You don't ever have to really look at it again. It's in your head then. And you don't bring the lunch, or you don't make the apology to grandma for not getting the thank you note, or you don't take on the responsibilities that you're teaching your child to do. You make them their responsibilities and you help that happen. So the way to start with that, you've got a B2. It's actually two lists of values. One is alphabetical, and then the one that starts on page 4 is by category. So you can use whichever list you want. But what you're going to do is you're going to look through this list of values. You've got highlighters, and you're going to highlight maybe 30 of these values that you think an adult child going off to college should know something about, should have somehow inculcated in their life living with you. There's not a magic to the number, but do 20 or 30 of these. Just highlight them as you go. This matters to me, this matters to me, this matters to me. And I'll give you a couple minutes to do that.